So for those of you who don't know Vint, he is the chief internet evangelist at Google.
Yep.
He is one of the founding fathers, part of the team that really designed the basic foundation to which we have the internet. So that is the TCP and IP protocols that gave birth over 40 years ago to what we enjoy and use every minute of the day. He is a former Stanford professor, a member of the U.S. National Science Board, a member of the U.S. National Academies of Science and Engineering. He has had so many awards that if I started listing them, we would lose our fireside chat. But your most recent award, Vint, was from the IEEE.
IEEE.
That's
right.
And they gave you an award on the birthday of the internet this year, 40 years. And one of the things they said about Vint is Cerf's tireless commitment to the internet's evolution, improvement, oversight, evangelism throughout its history has made an indelible impact on the world. It is largely due to his efforts that we have the internet, which has changed the way society lives. Didn't mean to embarrass you.
I just need to emphasize something, that internet is not the sort of thing that happens because one or two people had an idea. I mean, Bob and I did do some original design work. But lesson number one, if you want to do something big, get help, especially from people who are smarter than you are. And believe me, we had a lot of help. So point number one. Point number two, something like this doesn't happen unless it's technically possible to happen. And so sometimes timing is everything. If the cost of computers had been too high, we wouldn't have done this. If telecommunications didn't increase its bandwidth, well, how about the arrival of optical fiber? In the absence of that, we wouldn't be doing the kind of video exchanges we've been doing for the past 2.5 or 3 years because of the pandemic. So I just want to emphasize that some of this is luck. It's like a student who asked the Nobel Prize-winning physicist once, he said, "Did you know you were going to get the Nobel Prize when you were doing this work?" And this is a meeting in Lindau. Well, I know we're way off topic.
No, we're right on topic.
It's an important lesson. So in a meeting in Lindau, where every year the Nobel Prize winners come, and I got to go to the one with the physicists just because they invited me, not because I have a Nobel Prize. And so this kid asked this question, and the guy says, "Listen, winning the Nobel Prize is 95% luck and 5% knowing how to do the math." And everybody else is nodding and saying basically.
And we're going to ask Jim about how good his math is, because he actually has a Nobel Prize and he'll be out next. And I don't think it was luck. But Vin, I want to ask you about this moment of creating the internet and just go back there, especially because we're in the Computer Science History Museum of all places. And so when we think about that, when you invent technology, with all the humility that you describe, you can't know its unforeseen consequences. That's just where you are. And now that you reflect back, I'd just love to know, what are some of the positive and negative unintended consequences of internet technologies?
Well, John mentioned spam. He said, back then you were a pariah if you sent spam messages, and now we get dozens of them per real message. So it didn't occur to me, and I don't think to Bob, that people would end up abusing things the way they have. But, all powerful technologies have the unfortunate possibility of being used in a bad way. And so we see that, and I'm disappointed in that. And I wish that there were ways to countermand some of it. So there are three possibilities. Possibility number one is, if you figure out a technical way to keep somebody from actually doing something, harmful or bad, that's good. It's like, putting on a seatbelt and requiring people to wear it. If that doesn't work, then you can do something that I'll call post hoc enforcement. If we catch you doing this, there will be consequences. And of course, you won't catch everybody, but at least people know that that's wrong and you should not do that. And so the post hoc thing is the next possibility. And then the third thing that you can say is, don't do that. It's just wrong. And I know that sounds kind of wimpy, But in fact, you know that the weakest force in the universe is gravity. And yet when you get enough mass, it holds the planets in orbit around the sun. So think about having enough social mass of conventions within a society that can somehow moderate bad behaviors just because it's societally or unacceptable. So those are my 3 ways of trying to deal with some of the bad side effects. On the other hand, though, wow, this has turned out to be amazing. The things that we can do by hooking computers together and hooking people up to each other is astonishing. And in fact, many of you entrepreneurs and venture capitalists or investors would not be where you are today if it weren't for the fact that hooking people together and then empowering them with computing technology is just, it's how things work today. We've all learned lessons from that. So in spite of all of the stuff that you could point at and say, boy, I wish that didn't happen, I would argue that mostly we've benefited from all of this. So we're looking at this, in my case, over a 50-year period, because this starts with the ARPANET in 1969. So I know, I hate numbers like that. They just keep getting, as long as they go monotonically increasing, it's okay.
Well, we started at 40, so now we're at 50, so they're rising quickly by the end of this. We'll talk about the next 50 years. But before we get to the future, in the middle of creating, at that moment that you created the first protocol, did you have a feeling that you were onto something?
Oh, well, first of all, this was not one of those things where you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to create the internet. That's not what happened at all. We were basically presented with a problem. You know, the ARPANET, which was originated in 1969, was designed to solve an economic problem. ARPA was funding research in artificial intelligence in the 1960s. Every university that it was funded, about a dozen of them, kept saying, you have to buy us another world-class computer this year so we can keep doing world-class research. And even ARPA couldn't afford to do that for a dozen universities. So they said, we're going to build a network and you can share your resources. And everybody hated that. They said, we're going to build it anyway. And we're going to use this iconoclastic technology called packet switching, which was heresy at the time because everybody knew the way you build networks was circuit switching. So we built the ARPANET, and it worked. We solved some really hard problems. Steve Crocker, my best friend, led the network working group. We had to figure out not only how to build the packet net, which Fulber, Neck, and Newman did, but also to figure out how to connect different brains of computers to each other, which was a non-trivial exercise. So that worked so well that ARPA then said, oh, maybe we should think about using computers in command and control in order to manage our assets better than the other guy. And that's when Bob Kahn shows up in my lab at Stanford and he says, Vint, we have a problem. And my reaction was, you mean we? And he said, well, the ARPANET worked really well. Now they want to use computers in command and control. The implications of that are that there'll be computers in ships at sea, mobile vehicles, and aircraft. We built the ARPANET out of dedicated telephone circuits connecting the packet switches to each other. Doesn't work out on the battlefield. Tanks run over the wires and it breaks. The ships get all tangled up, and the airplanes never even make it off the tarmac. So Bob had already started working on a mobile radio system, which was set into operation here in the San Francisco Bay Area, operated by SRI International, and a packet satellite system folded in the Atlantic to connect the western part of Europe to the eastern part of the U.S. with a shared multiple ground station system, sort of like an Ethernet in the sky. So he shows up with all 3 of these networks, and down the street is Bob Metcalf at Xerox PARC working on Ethernet. This is like May of '73 is when I remember that first gets started. So we have 4 different packet switch nets to be concerned about. And our problem is, how the hell do we make this all look uniform? Because the computers are on all these different packet switch nets, different data rates, different packet sizes, different addressing structures, different latencies and delays. Oh, and by the way, we weren't allowed to change any of the networks to let them know they were part of the internet. They had to be untouched. And so the design pops out at you almost, it forces itself on you. I need a box that knows how to talk to these 2 different networks and also knows about the internet, because the networks they're talking to don't. And so you invent this scheme where you have internet packets that are like little postcards that have a to address, a from address, and some content. And whenever they go through another network, you stick them in an envelope that is understood by that network. So you send it to the next hop, wherever that is, destination host or a router, which we called gateways at the time because we didn't know they were supposed to be called routers. And then you pull it out of the envelope and you look to see where it's supposed to go. And then you create a new envelope for the next network and you stick it in and off it goes. It's as simple as that. So honestly, this wasn't one of those gigantic, mind bursts or anything. It was mostly the thing dictated what the solution had to be.
So I love the story of how you were solving a problem and you were at that moment. And I'd love to take you to last year and this year. So in the wake of what you created, so many people have tried to replicate a big moment, a big shift in technology. And so let's look at two. One being the metaverse, okay. AR, VR technologies primarily, but not exclusively, and AI, specifically generative AI, and microphone technology, which clearly can be improved. I can hear you.
Does this mean that nobody heard anything all the last 15 minutes?
Everybody, we're just going to go through that again, although a couple people in the front were taking notes, so we'll just pass those on the internet to you later, maybe in an email, not spam.
Okay.
So the metaverse.
Yes.
High popularity last year. Is it a hammer or a nail? Meaning, is it looking for a problem or does it solve a problem? Tell me what your thoughts are on that one.
At the moment, I think it's more like a hammer looking for a nail. And also the definition seems to be very unclear. Some people think it means 3D virtual reality and everybody's wearing a headset. Can you imagine if you were trying to do a video conference and everybody had to wear this 3D headset, we'd all look like Darth Vader. And because nobody would like that. So that means you'd have to have an avatar, which is a new business, creating avatars. And then what do they wear? Oh, we can rent clothing from Gucci and Ralph Lauren for $5 a month for your avatar.
Well, in Roblox, I have pink hair. Just.
Well, yeah, I would certainly like to have any hair at all. I don't care what the color is. So it isn't clear, exactly how that's going to work out. I think the augmented reality, if that's a part of the metaverse, and I leave it to you to decide, but if augmented reality is part of it, I'm actually more enthusiastic about that because I can see how much value there is in taking a combination of the real world and what we know about it and presenting to you useful information in context. And so that could be pretty exciting.
What would be an AR use case where you say, if we can get the technology and the surrounding of it correct, I'd be really excited about this?
Yeah. But you mean which one?
Yeah.
Which
like
one?
The
AR stuff is one example of that. I think what John Hennessy said this morning about amplification deserves repetition. In fact, for this interview, we could just replay John and it would be fantastic. But then you wouldn't have a chance to ask your question.
Well, then I'd have to put my goggles on.
Right, and all that stuff.
It wouldn't work, yeah.
So I think the other thing which is very apparent is that we are, you've heard the term computational linguistics and computational physics and computational X for almost any value of X has suddenly become not only a buzzword, but it's a real opportunity. So I'm quite excited about that. The fact that you can use computers to do things that you couldn't do yourself, like how about searching the entire World Wide Web? You can't do that, I can't do that, but our computers can. And so using these things to empower ourselves to do stuff that we couldn't otherwise do, for me, is super exciting. And of course, just watching to see what the next opportunities are. The machine learning stuff, which I'm sure you're going to ask about.
I know, we just slipped away for everybody. We're not going to talk about AR, VR anymore. Let's talk about AI, because you just went there.
Oh yeah, funny thing about that.
Hammer or nail?
Yeah, it's both in some sense. Although I'm not even sure the analogy helps a whole lot. But and also I want to be careful to distinguish AI, artificial general intelligence, from machine learning, which is what we're doing machine learning. And it has a variety of ways in which you can do it. I'm no expert, so be careful and don't take too much away from what I have to say. But I think that we're seeing very powerful ways of using correlation, which is what a lot of these engines do, which is why machine translation has worked out fairly well. Not perfect, but remarkably well. How about speech understanding, speech generation, even taking accessibility into account? People with difficulty speaking can have these systems trained to understand their way of speech and then convert that into something more understandable. So in addition to just literally doing either the transcription or the translations. So those sorts of things, these things that depend on strong correlation, work really well. On the other hand, we're all experiencing, and everybody's talking about GPT or Google's version of that. And we know that it doesn't always work the way we would like it to. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Can you talk about that when it doesn't work as we would like to? So either in machine learning, or I think what's been talked about a lot is in generative AI, which is something different, that it can make mistakes. It can be erroneous. It can get the answer wrong. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So this is a revelation for me recently. I was thinking about the fact that if you train one of these machine learning systems on a wide range of information, some of which is wrong, you wouldn't be surprised that it would get stuff wrong from time to time. But suppose you trained it on stuff that you are pretty confident in, okay? These are factual material, this is historical fact, and so on. And then you ask it to do something. You might ask a question. I asked it, of course, egotistically, I said, write me a biography of Vint Cerf, just to see what it did know. And it got a bunch of things wrong. And I was trying to figure out, well, why is that? And then I realized how this actually works. I mean, think about it. You ingest tons of words in particular order. And eventually you figure out with many billions of parameters what the most likely next word is. So these things are, put the next word on the thing that I just generated. And so what happens is that it takes all this factual material and word for word, it's like a salad shooter. I mean, you know how the lettuce goes all over everywhere. So the facts are all over everywhere. And it mixes them together because it doesn't know any better. What it knows is how to string a sentence together that's grammatically likely to be correct. But it's drawn from the material that it had learned from. So the fact that it is based on factual material doesn't help because of the way this thing produces text. And boy, we should be thinking hard about how to cope with that, because the system itself has no clue about what it's doing, as I see it anyway. It's just generating likely sentences from the preamble that it's produced so far.
But how do you think about that? So there are a couple of things. We should touch on Google's AI principles, because I think that's an overall framework. Let's come back to that in 1 second. But so you asked Bard, or you asked ChatGPT for your bio. At the same time, probably 1 million students across the world were asking similar questions for essays. And they get them actually quite right in terms of structuring and amassing information. So how do you reconcile that?
That's the problem, is that you can't tell the difference between an eloquently expressed lie and a factual statement. I did one interaction once where I was trying to figure out if the system could learn anything from me. So I said, okay, at the end of every sentence, I want you to put this emoji. And it said, okay, I can do that. Except it didn't do it. So I said, you didn't put the emoji at the end. And it started to apologize. And it was really eloquent about apologizing. And then it didn't do it again. And I did, we went through this cycle for a little while. And I finally concluded that if I needed to find some place to help me express an apology, this is the right place to go. Really. But it didn't know what it was I was trying to get it to do. So we are a long ways away from more the awareness, kind of self-awareness that I think we would want. I know now everybody should be levitating out of your seats, because self-aware might mean, real, a conscious intellect, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And I don't know whether I mean self-awareness in that sense, but some kind of awareness of what you said and what it meant and whether or not it was correct or not. I think is still some distance from our grasp. And when we're seeing people trying to retrain these systems to be less likely to say something wrong, I think we're still a long ways away from being able to do that successfully, because the human feedback rate of human feedback is very low compared to the amount of material ingested into the systems for training. So I think these are, it's better than a mechanical Turk, and it does do things well, but I would say the best applications right now are writing fiction, because I've asked it to write stories, and it's really good at making up stories.
But Vint, if I were to try and be better than Bard, I have an emoji ready from a business executive, which is like, you know, that little like, oh no face. So if you're a business I couldn't even emulate it, but if you're a business executive, right now everyone, potentially your board, your employees, the people around you are saying, you've got to implement generative AI in your business. So what do you tell business executives who read this in the newspaper every day and are being told, what are the applications for your business? What do you say?
Snake oil. I mean, there's another word for this, but I won't use it here.
Or you can try the emoji expression.
Seriously, there's an ethical issue here that I hope some of you will consider. On the engineering side, I think engineers like me should be responsible for trying to find a way to tame some of these technologies so that they are less likely to cause trouble. And of course, depending on the application, it could be, you know, writing a not very good fiction story is one thing. Giving advice to somebody that has medical consequences is a very different thing. And figuring out how to minimize the worst case potential is very, very important. Figuring out how to do that is hard. So on the engineering side, we owe the general public something, but you do too, both on the entrepreneurial side. Oh, look, I can use this to make something really cool, even though it doesn't work quite right all the time. Or, man, I can sell this to the investors because it's a hot topic and everybody will throw money at me. You know, don't do that. Be thoughtful. Be thoughtful about what it is that you might be unleashing. You're right that we can't always predict what's going to happen with these technologies. And to be honest with you, most of the problem is people. That's why we still watch Shakespeare's plays, because people haven't changed in the last 400 years, let alone the last 4,000. They will often seek to do that which is in their benefit and not yours. So we have to remember that. And we need to be thoughtful about how we use these technologies.
So if you're a young engineer at Stanford coming into the world and excited to solve hard problems around generative AI, just given everything you said, what would be the one or two problems you would throw their way to help push the engineering agenda forward?
Well, the thing I like, remember I mentioned computational X here, the thing I really like are the kinds of problems where large amounts of information will allow you to do something that you could not normally do within your own capacity. So I'll pick on the folks at DeepMind again. I haven't been able to attend every session, so this might be repetitive. But when they figured out with AlphaFold how 200 million different proteins fold up, that's astonishing. I mean, that is just downright astonishing. Being able to do things like that, which we would never really do manually, I don't think, are extremely exciting and attractive. So finding classes of problems where these kinds of tools actually work well would be a tremendous contribution. And so what we need to learn, I think, is what works and why it works, what doesn't work and why it doesn't work. You've heard that more than once today in different contexts, including business decisions. So, but understanding why things don't work is really important. I remember Neil Lane and I were testifying in front of the Senate Committee on Science, and at one point Neil said, you know, we don't publish our mistakes. And I remember thinking, maybe we should, because people will learn more from the mistakes than they do from things that work, as long as you can figure out why it didn't work. Also, context counts. Sometimes things work great over here and the same thing won't work very well over there. You have to understand in which context was it that that thing worked. So there's plenty of room here for contribution, I think, you had to use young engineer, didn't you? And,
well, any engineer of any age, but someone who's thinking about that question.
I have to tell you, I did a show once for AARP, and they said, talk to us about senior people and the internet. And my first slide said, some people think older people don't know how to use the internet. My next slide said, I have news for you, we invented it.
All right, so you got me on that. Of course, I was thinking about my college sophomore a bit when I was asking you that question. So let me ask then a question about the future. So you're young, you created the internet. If you could start to say what would be the next sets of technologies, not constrained by AI, what would you like to solve? What would you like to build in the next 50?
Well, reflecting again on something that John said this morning, precision medicine is really interesting. The idea of trying to understand how this complex organism works, whether it's a human body or other biological systems, understanding that better would be really amazing. The other thing I would love to do, and have been challenging some of the senior people in artificial intelligence to consider, is how to get the system to formulate a model of what it knows. Mm-hmm. The idea that you think about this, what's a table? A table is a flat surface perpendicular to the gravitational field. Of course, most people don't think about it that way, but every 2-year-old knows what a table is, and they quickly discover what you can do with it, and also what else could be a table. So just with very little experimentation and learning, you discover that a chair can be a table, a box can be a table, your lap can be a table. And these 2-year-olds understand this. Whereas, getting computers to understand anything about the real world, which was something that John McCarthy tried to do, and it was one of his biggest challenges, was real world knowledge. We didn't succeed very well. If we could build systems that could build models of what they are experiencing and seeing, or if they could interact with the real world and learn from that experimentally, and that's how we learn. We discover the bottle is not part of the table because we could pick it up and move it, or we can see around it. We don't have that yet, at least not in my experience, with a lot of the AI systems that we're working on. So I don't mean just we at Google, but everybody. So there's so much left to do. I just wish I was 8 years old so I could start all over again. And I'm curious as hell about what the 22nd century is going to be like, because the 21st sure as hell ain't turning out as good as I would like.
Well, one thing I know that you have a deep interest in, aside from technology, is wine.
Oh, yes.
Quite
very
a wine
important.
enthusiast. So to tie those together, on the birthday of the internet, 4050 or so, what wine do you recommend that we drink most captures the internet's birthday?
Oh my, okay, so now that's if you had just stopped at what wine would I recommend, that would be an easy question to answer, but what characterizes the internet? Wow. Well, you know what? I think it has to be effervescent, don't you? And so we need to think about, what's on the champagne side.
I thought you were going to go for red, but
Sorry?
I thought you were going to go for a red wine, but you went to champagne.
Well, I often go for red wine, but if we were really celebrating internet, it needs to be effervescent because it has been, hasn't it? So Cristal, I think I would choose Cristal for that. In second place, a Dom Perignon, preferably 96 or 2005 or something like that. I have a couple thousand bottles in my cellar, and we plan to drink them all, which is, we did the math, we do about a half a bottle a day, so that's 4,000 days, which is more than 10 years, and we'll be in our 90s by the time, we get to that. And so this is the incentive to keep going, right? Except when you look at the bottle and you say, I wonder if we should buy this. Well, I don't know. We might not be around when it's time to drink it.
mean, with that pacing of drinking, you'll definitely be able to actually solve more of the world's technology problems. Maybe to finally wrap it up, besides the champagne for the internet, I mean, given the audience you have here, what advice do you have to the entrepreneurs and the business community?
Well, you got some amazingly good advice from John Chambers, for example. I would advise you to listen to what he had to say. Staying focused is super important. There's such a thing as insurmountable opportunities, where there are just so many things you could possibly do. You can even figure out how to do it, and yet you can't really afford to do them all. And so staying focused is really important. I think the other thing I would say is that if you discover that it isn't working, it's a good idea to discover as soon as possible whether you can either make it work or do something different. But pounding away. Now, having said all this, pounding away for a long time, it's hard when you're starting a company and you have finite resources to do this. My projects, thank goodness, have all been funded over the long term. So the internet is still going strong, and it was funded for over 20 years by ARPA, and it's continuing to be funded by the National Science Foundation since the middle 1980s. So my projects take decades. The interplanetary internet is another example of that, starting in 1998. Here it is 25 years later. And we're just at the point where it is becoming likely that we can actually deploy something that will support manned and robotic exploration in the subsequent decades of this 21st century. So I kind of like projects that involve patience and persistence. Those two things really count. But of course, you have to have the resources that let you exercise the patience and the persistence.
Well, with that, thank you so much, Vint. This was
Thank you.
fantastic.
Appreciate it. Cheers. Whoop. As they say, see you on the net.